This is the first video on Chapter 12 on tax efficiency, administrative efficiency and flexibility. So we completed tax equity in Chapter 11. Now we're looking at the three more elements of a good tax. So what we're going to do in terms of efficiency is we look at the excess burden of taxation. So you can remember that efficiency has to do with small excess burdens. If there's no excess burden of a tax, then it's efficient, and the larger the excess burden of a tax is, the less efficient it is. That's something that you can easily remember, and you know about excess burdens by now. So we're going to look at two approaches to determine the excess burden. We're going to use indifference curves first, and then we're going to use the consumer surplus approach. This is important for you to be able to discuss efficiency using a graph in either one of these two methods. So firstly, we're going to use the indifference curve method and compare lump sum taxes and general taxes with selective taxes. So firstly, 12.1.1, lump sum taxes. Now a lump sum tax, the first two paragraphs that I've highlighted there are very important, so read them a few times. It's a fixed amount per individual, which is not a function of income, wealth or consumption. It's just something like Margaret Thatcher implemented in Britain, a poll tax. Everybody who owned a house had to pay a certain tax, not depending on the size of the house, and that led to her downfall. You should certainly Google Thatcher's poll tax and read about it, and what was it, why didn't it work, and so on. Very interesting. So we will focus on figure 12.1. This is an important figure. So what they do is they compare two taxes. The first one is an poll tax, lump sum tax, which means that income is taken away from the individual. So you remember that the income effect is a parallel shift of the budget constraint. So we start with equilibrium on budget constraint AB, and the consumer maximizes utility at E0. Then a lump sum tax is levied, which means that a certain amount of income is taken away, and it's important to note that relative prices don't change. Relative prices don't change. The slope of the budget constraint is the ratio of the commodities prices, could be y over px, and so if the parallel shift means that relative prices don't change, so the consumer moves down to a lower level of utility, to E1. Then we want to compare that to a selective tax. But how big is this tax? So we can measure the size of the tax either in terms of Y or in terms of X. So the size of the income is the value of quantity AC on the y-axis. So we often let the price of Y be equal to 1. So if the price is 1 rand for a good Y, then AC is a quantity of Y times 1, so it's also a value. You can think of AC as the size of the lump sum tax in terms of good Y, but we could also have measured it in terms of good X if we wanted to. So how much less of X does the consumer have as a maximum? And that is the size of the lump sum tax. So we will focus on Y. You have a homework that you should do the same analysis for X. So the individual moves to a lower budget constraint, and the new budget constraint is CD. Now we want to compare that to a selective tax, where only a tax on X is levied, while the tax on Y is not levied. So that means X becomes more expensive, and now we have the new budget line, the green budget line, because X is more expensive. The slope of the new budget line, of the green budget line, is now the ratio, the new price ratio, the new price of X divided by the original price of Y. That's the slope of the green curve, and that has become steeper. So the next thing is to find the new equilibrium point. I remember when I had to present this many years ago for the first time, I had to think very hard, why is E2 the new equilibrium point? So to obtain the after budget line, which yields the same tax revenue as a lump sum tax, the new equilibrium must lie on CD. So the line CD is the budget line that shows the effect on income as a result of the lump sum tax. So if we want to compare the two taxes, we must stay on that budget line. We must stay on that budget line. So E2 is naturally the new equilibrium point of the selective tax, because it's also on the original budget line, the original lump sum new budget line. So we can compare the incomes, and that's why E2 is now the new optimal point. And if you then draw your indifference curve U2, it has to be tangent to the green budget line at E2. Obviously the green line must run through point A, because there's no tax on Y, and after the tax the consumer can still afford to buy A if she spends all her money on Y. But now she can afford less of X, namely point F, if she spends all her money on X. So the conclusion is that a lump sum tax is better than a selective tax, because the welfare only goes down to E1, while with the selective tax the welfare goes further down, namely to E2. So, and one can also see that the size of the movement must obviously be the same at point E2. GE2 is the same distance as AC. I mean, the two curves are parallel, so that's obvious. But so that the decrease in income to point E2 is still the same as the decrease in income as a result of the lump sum tax. So this whole story is told in paragraph 12.1.2, selective taxes. The first thing is, so what are we doing? We're comparing the income of the impact of the selective tax to that of a lump sum tax that generates the same tax revenue. That's what we're doing in figure 12.1. The new budget line must run through A because the Y is not taxed, and then the after-tax budget line, the equilibrium point must be on the same budget line as of the lump sum tax, namely line CD. Okay, so you can see that 12.1.3 is on tax neutrality, so I'm just going to move to the textbook quickly. Tax neutrality. It's important that you know what tax neutrality means, but it just means that the taxes should not prevent consumers from maximizing utility or producers of maximizing profit. Then it's neutral. So the tax should have little or no impact on economic decisions about what to buy. So when do decisions change? If relative prices change, then people will switch away from one good to another. We'll move away from the more expensive good towards a cheaper good, and then behavior has changed. The lump sum tax we saw changed all the prices in the same proportion. Well, the prices didn't really change, but the price ratios stayed the same, so we didn't affect behavior. The consumer consumed less of both goods in the same proportion. But if you only change one price, then they will substitute one good for another. So then there's a substitution effect also playing a role, while with the lump sum tax is only an income effect. So that's neutral if behavior is not changed. But there's something like the theory of the second best, and that says that we don't start at an optimal position. We very often in real life start at a non-neutral position. It's already non-neutral. And if we then move away from that position, we could have a positive non-neutral effect. If we move in the positive direction and we improve the situation of the economy. And so, or if we move even further away from a non-neutral position and becomes worse, then that's a negative non-neutral, let's make that red, a negative non-neutral movement. So read about tax neutrality. So an efficient economic efficiency in terms of taxation means small excess burden and a neutral tax that doesn't change behavior. So I see that the clock is running, and the next section on where we look at excess burden from the consumer surplus point of view is probably going to be a video on its own. So I will stop the first video here.